Okay, so there's also another thing I wanted to bring up too. You talked about you were looking for happiness. There's something I learned years ago, and I can't remember where it came from, but I've looked it up. There is some validity to it. The Germans back in the day, when somebody would come with depression, they likely didn't even call it that back in the day, but they had a case of the Mondays or the blahs. They didn't know what to do. They're talking to their doctor, and that's when doctors actually talk to you. They would say, well, you need to go help the first person that you find that needs help in your family or community, and then come back and see me in 2 weeks and tell me how you feel. And inevitably they would come back, because this is before SSRIs and anything like that. They would come back, hey, doc, actually, I feel a little bit better. Oh, what a surprise. Because we intuitively know that once you actually externalize kind of your ability to help, and you're not just constantly in your own head, you can actually empathize with somebody else and start bringing them to a better existence. That's like the fundamental reason why I think we exist, is to be in a community that helps each other and helps each other grow. And so you found that out by going out and saying, like, man, I really need to go, help somebody, and I need to help the community. And so you did a sweat lodge, and then little by little, you got closer and closer to where you wanted to be in that space, which is really cool. So now Ibogaine, 5-MeO-DMT. I don't really know what they are. We're talking about psychedelics. Obviously, they have psychedelic effects, but what are they? And, how do they differ from other psychedelics that are on there? I mean, you mentioned that there's the effect of being able to come down or get off of opioids. What other effects or what other benefits would Ibogaine have for somebody that would require treatment?
Yeah, so Ibogaine comes from a plant in Africa called Iboga. This plant has been used ceremonially for centuries by a tradition that calls themselves the Bwiti tradition in Gabon and Cameroon, kind of West Africa. And it is the root bark of this plant that is used in these ceremonies. And they use it for initiation, they use it for healing. And in the early 60s, a gentleman by the name of Howard Lotsof, who was addicted to heroin at the time, his chemist buddy knew that he would try just about anything. He said, I think you might be interested in this stuff I happen to have in my freezer. Gave him some Ibogaine, which is one alkaloid out of that root bark. And he took it, not knowing what he was getting into. He went on this powerful journey. It can be anywhere from a 24 to 36 hour long trip, and
Whoa.
had no idea what he was getting into. He took it on the way to his psychologist, spent way more time on his psychologist's couch than he was planning on. But when it was all over, he realized, wait a second, I haven't wanted heroin the whole time I've been on this, nor do I want it now. So that's when its anti-addictive properties were discovered. And Howard became a real champion for this medicine. He started knocking on doors. He formed the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance, which set up some standards of care. And that's ultimately how it became known in the modern Western world. There was also a medicine, there was a prescription medicine in France in the late 1800s even, early 1900s, called Lamborghini, I believe it was called. And it was basically a microdose of Ibogaine that was taken, and it was ultimately outlawed in the middle of the last century in France as well. But yeah, and then so that's Ibogaine. It was generally discovered as an anti-addictive compound in the early 1960s, and then a whole bunch of Ibogaine clinics opened up starting in the 80s and 90s. And it was mostly used to treat opioid use disorder. But recently, it's been discovered that it's one of the most fascinating compounds out there and seems to be helping people with a lot more than just addiction. PTSD type symptoms it seems to be addressing, and incredibly, and why it seems to be so great for veterans, is traumatic brain injury as well. So we finished a study with Stanford University that did brain scans before and after that shows in a lot of these guys, Ibogaine, just one dose of it is reversing traumatic brain injury in a lot of these guys.
Whoa, wait, hold on a sec. Say that again. One dose, so like one 24-hour long
Yeah.
kind of trip is enough to start healing the TBI damage?
Yeah, so the Stanford study
Whoa.
was 30 guys, special forces veterans that had a traumatic brain injury. That's what they needed in order to get into the study. They went to Stanford prior to coming to Ambio. They did brain scans and a battery of other tests. They came down to Ambio for just Ibogaine, just one dose like we do in our 5-day protocol. And then when they didn't have 5-MeO DMT, we were just looking at one signal. They went back to Stanford after that, immediately thereafter, flew straight back to Stanford, had more brain scans, had more tests. A month later, most of the guys went back for more brain scans, more tests. And the pre-brain scans are clearly showing traumatic brain injury, which shows up basically as a dark spot in the brain where there's not enough blood flow. And then after the Ibogaine, the brains on most of these guys are just lit up all the way, even more than an average person. One of the guys, he described his Ibogaine journey as shallow and long. He didn't really have a powerful psychedelic journey, not a lot of visions, nothing like that, which you don't necessarily need for Ibogaine to work for you. But he said that he had been living feeling as if there were 3 knives going into his brain, almost like knives going into a butcher's block. And he said that at a certain point in the Ibogaine journey, he felt those knives be removed. And he said he felt his whole brain relax inside of his skull. And he went back to Stanford, had his second brain scan, came for his month follow-up, and the radiology tech is not really supposed to show anybody their brain scans, but this guy's pretty influential. And he said, hey man, I really want to see my brain scans. Let me see my brain scans. And the guy goes, I'm not supposed to show you, but yours are so dramatic. Let me show you. And his pre-brain scan showed dark spots in those spots where he felt those knives in his brain. The post-brain scans, 0 dark spots.
This is revolutionary.
It is.
And I didn't realize that it had this profound an effect, because I mean, traumatic brain injury in the forces is pretty ubiquitous, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of how big the problem is. Having done some work with Concussion Legacy Foundation here, the Canadian Armed Forces is barely getting to the point where they're even aware that they need to look out for their troops when it comes to, blast waves and concussive forces. And then on the backside, when you're a veteran, the idea that you may have a mild traumatic brain injury that's causing PTSD like symptoms is not, it's not even being tracked right now. It's not even a conversation. So the fact that there is potentially a cure for traumatic brain injury, and it's natural and not created by a pharmaceutical company, my mind is starting to race right now, because that is a groundbreaking discovery that could have massive impact. Because in my opinion, I think we're, the suicide epidemic in the veteran world, it's not just a mental health crisis. It's a toxic exposure, traumatic brain injury. Like, there's so many comorbidities in there. And if you can just knock down one of them, which is traumatic brain injury, and just eliminate that off the table, I think you would reduce your suicidality probably by 20, 30% in a relatively short amount of time.